Hello, I am Dr. Charmaine Ramlogn-Steel, and I'm the lead lecturer and unit coordinator for a pair of our first year Anatomy and Physiology units. So I became the unit coordinator for Foundational Anatomy and Physiology to Allied Health and Medical Sciences students in 2019. These units are quite content heavy. Now, in addition to multiple student cohorts from multiple allied health disciplines and medical sciences, our students are allowed to enroll via different modes, meaning they can be internal at 3 campuses as well as study the units via distance. And that also meant that we have a team involved in the delivery. Now, just a little bit on how we deliver the unit. Each week we have lectures for all students. Typically, as the lead on the unit, I deliver these lectures using textbook images or photographs from Rockhampton, and we link to our campuses or via Zoom for our distance students. Now, in addition to our live lectures, the internal students will attend weekly labs that are delivered by team members at the different campuses. And in the labs, students progress from the textbook images to viewing structures on anatomical models and plastinets, which are preserved human bodies. And they also engage in palpations where they feel structures on themselves. Now, the distance students attended a residential school, which is an intensive session at the end of term to try to cover that practical content. Now, as you see of this relatively large practical multimodal unit, after my first year and reflecting on the delivery, I found that one of the first issues was the inequity of delivery of content to our different cohorts. We also found that students were quickly overwhelmed with the content, especially our distance students whose first time to engage with the practical component was at the end of term. And then we also found that students who were not on the primary campus felt left out. At CQ, one of our core values is inclusiveness, where we really strive to provide equitable access to educational experiences for all our students. Now, just after that first year that I delivered these units, COVID came along. And even though I started to initiate some changes to try to bring some equity to the unit, COVID essentially forced us to think outside of the box and come up with innovative ways to deliver our content and assessments in a very practically oriented unit. Over the course of a couple years, I instituted some changes to try to provide equity across our student cohort by doing 3 things. Creating a more interactive lecture environment, and that's simply by asking questions and learning students' names and speaking to them directly, even via Zoom. Secondly, was creating a learning environment where both our on-campus and distance students could engage with that lab component on a weekly basis, and that's where our challenge was. And the third was by generating assessments that were fair and equitable for everyone. Now, that biggest challenge was that lab component, because if you remember, our distance students weren't coming in for those internal labs. So essentially what I did is I utilized the flipped classroom strategy and flipped the lab component of the unit. That meant that students were given information before labs, and they were encouraged to engage with the content prior to attending a labs or residential school. I created a pack of resources that's targeted initially for our distance students, so they're able to engage with that content weekly and in smaller chunks, and help them to prepare for their residential school at the end of term. But our internal students also utilize these resources for preparation and for revision of the weekly content. So our resources included videos using the models that we use on a weekly basis in the labs. In the videos, I'm able to point out structures and discuss them while rotating the models and giving students that 3D visual. Coupled with the videos, we had practical worksheets so students can follow along while viewing the videos, and the internal students use them in their labs. Additionally, we provided photographs of the models in different planes and orientations, and the students were encouraged to label these while studying. And lastly, we recorded videos instructing students on how to perform palpations and discussing medical images or small case studies to just bring the content into a more relatable, real-world use. Repetition of the content was important, especially in these content-heavy units. So by creating these different accessible and innovative resources, we catered for different learning styles, but by doing this, we essentially nudge students to study the same thing multiple times, which has been shown to help with retention of content. Now, by creating these resources, we found that student experience improved. The unit typically has quite good student feedback and satisfaction. That remained high and has consistently been high. But what we found is that more comments started coming in, whether via email or student evaluation, thanking us for resources and saying how much the extra resources helped them to prepare for residential school and for assessments. And the staff also found that students came more prepared and they spent less time formally teaching but facilitating learning. The restructure of the unit has resulted in an increase in successful completion by approximately 10%. Now, whether this is transferable to others, I think that when we reflect on our student cohort and we understand their needs, we can use different aspects to bring equity across our student cohorts, whether it's single mode or multi-mode. Creating resources that cater for different learning styles requires work from the academic, but I think once implemented, you will see the rewards with student success.